Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A New Crusade. Today, I am here to speak with Mr. John Horvat. He is a author, a writer, and the vice president of the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. Today, I specifically wanted to speak to him because he wrote an article recently in the last few months critiquing the famous neo-reactionary thinker Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is well known under his screen name Mencius Moldbug. He very famously coined a lot of terms that are in use today. He was somewhat known as the leader of the neo-reactionary or NRX movement in in the mid 2000s or in 2010s. And he's since kind of retired to some extent, but still publishes not his ideas as much online, but still speaks a lot online. And he is very well known for coming up with the term the cathedral, which has since really escaped his own his world and has kind of just become a topic that is very, very commonly used. So how are you doing tonight, Mr. Horvat?
Doing very well. It's great to be on the show. Great to be on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really glad you joined me. The article was given to me by my good friend and someone you know as well, Mr. Michael Whitcraft, and I've had him on my channel before, and he had said, man, Mr. Horvat wrote an article against one of those guys. Don't you like him? And I said, well, I do kind of like him, yeah. And I was like, oh, I'd love to read this. And I thought it was a really interesting article. And the first thing I want to start off was you were kind of critiquing him, or one of the things you critiqued was his writing style. And both in how he writes and how he speaks, he is terribly long-winded and very, very confused and kind of so I'm curious, what was your kind of thoughts reading his, because he certainly doesn't write in a classical style.
Definitely not a classical style. I have the book. It's called Gray Mirror, Fascicle 1, Disturbance. I don't know if have you read it or you've seen it?
So I have not. I'm more familiar with his writings through his
online.
blog. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Generally when I read a book, I like to get. I like to review books, and I was hoping to review this book. And I started reading. I started taking notes. I tried to make sense out of it, and at a certain point, I just gave up. It was very hard to get some kind of coherence. Of course, he uses a lot of his own terms. I'm not necessarily privy to all the how he uses or employs those terms, but at the same time, it is, as you say, rambling. It is there are a lot of things that I couldn't make sense out of, and I said, well, this man, it's his philosophies. They just they don't have a coherent way of expressing themselves. I don't mind reading bad philosophers. I don't mind reading Heidegger or Nietzsche or something like that, because they do have some kind of structure and form. But this one didn't have structure and form, and that's what really got me upset about it, and that's why I wrote the critique that I did, because it doesn't have that.
Yeah, I had first come across him prior to becoming Catholic. I fancied myself a anarcho-capitalist, and so he did a
Ray Mothbard. What's his Mothbard? Rothbard.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, in that kind of realm, and he had done a video, not really a debate, but a debate-style conversation, a somewhat semi-moderated conversation with an anarcho-capitalist, and he was just making these really strange critiques. And I mean, I don't agree with anarcho-capitalism, but even looking back on it, looking at his critiques, he was saying, anarcho-capitalism is Newtonian physics, and what I propose is Einsteinian physics. And when you actually do the math, it doesn't, your system doesn't make sense. And he would just go on these long, weird tirades, and I was very hard to follow. And
exactly that. And it is something. It is a postmodern, post-liberal type of way of expressing oneself. And the postmodern idea is to destroy narrative, to deconstruct narratives. And so you don't have those narratives. You don't have those structures that you're used to when you're trying to study philosophy and study political thought. So it does. He is a deconstructionist. And so he doesn't like those universal perspectives that you can make once you have a coherent philosophy. So yes, I definitely. One of the things, one of the first points that I do make in the critique is that his purpose is to destroy certainties. You know, he says, "I want to destroy." You may not have many answers, but you'll certainly have a lot more questions after you read this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't even have questions, so I mean, it didn't even get that far. But it is the idea that there are no certainties, and you can't really build something on that, and that's I don't see where he's going. This book, Gray Mirrors, it's fascicle 1. He announces 4 fascicles. He hasn't written them all. He's only written this one. But the answer is in fascicle 4. He says he's going to give all the answers. So you're going to have to buy all 3 books, all 4 books, in order to finally get to, for him to say to come out with his wisdom that he says he has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. So I'm curious, how did his book come across your radar? A lot of the work that I know in general the TFP does is a little bit more grounded in what might be called like a classical philosophy and a Christian philosophy. And, like you said, he's very postmodern. He's very post-liberal. Like he that's what he represents, is like this dark post-liberal, dark enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, right? So how did it, just from how did his work come across your radar?
Well, one of my specialties is postmodern thought, and I've been studying that for a long time, and so I do have a radar out there. Probably the one big exposure to him was the New York Times interview that he gave 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. That really just put him on. I just said, well, I have to read this person. That's when I bought the book. I said, I'm going to see what's behind him. Because the interview was actually a little bit more coherent, and it had some interesting points. But when I got into the actual book, it didn't. He tends to repeat himself a lot, and he repeats the things that get good reactions. So I've heard him speak on several occasions, and he repeats a lot of these things that it doesn't really get into original ideas or develop those original ideas.
Mm-hmm. Had you read his what is it called, Unqualified Reservations or something like that?
No, I didn't. I haven't. I really didn't get into that. I mean, I didn't get into that, or even BAP or people like that are really into those kind of. He's probably another along the same lines as Yarvin, of course, but no, I haven't read that.
Okay, yeah, because I know for a lot of people, he had initially really blown up, especially kind of in this more online right-wing sphere, with an article he had written called "An Open Letter to Open-Minded Progressives," and it was essentially his attempt to take these liberals and kind of push them into this post-liberal direction that he was in. And so it seems to me that a lot of his writing more so addresses what you were saying, deconstruction. It's the deconstruction of the current liberal regime that we live in, and not necessarily. And so he doesn't really care to necessarily offer much more than that. He seems happy to maybe knock down a wall and kind of just leave it at that.
Very much so. Because and I don't know. Maybe in fascicle 4, you will have something that he will construct. And it seems to be what he seems to want to construct is what he calls a type of CEO monarchy type situation, which of course doesn't make sense, because a monarch is different than a CEO. A CEO is a businessman. A monarch is a symbol. He is a representative character that represents more than just business interest or even just the mechanical interest of a society. He's an embodiment of certain desires of people. So I don't think he has the right idea of what a monarchy is. And one of the things that really turned me off about him was that he is very much a power person, power politics. Everything is reduced to power. There's no real other something beyond the power struggle, and that is a Marxist perspective, from all things considering, even though, of course, he would never admit to being some kind of Marxist. But it is a Marxist perspective to reduce everything to power and money, and to interpret history that way.
So with I guess I guess a more uned or a less familiar perspective, he is called a reactionary, and a lot of people who advocate for, older systems of the return to older systems of, governance and foundation, more maybe foundational governing systems or ideas or worldviews are often also called reactionary.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that's how you would necessarily view yourself, but I'm curious, in what way does he fit or does he not fit into kind of this more classical idea?
Yeah, I don't really see him as a reactionary because he is so anti-narrative that he says, well, everything is a false narrative. Our whole history is a false narrative. The cultural war is a false narrative. So, everything has, you don't have a substance. You don't have a thing to react to, or he doesn't recognize those things, those structures that, that would a reactionary would react to, or those structures to where a reactionary would go to. So it's hard to define, how he would define himself, but I don't think he would fit into that reactionary category.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then another thing that you said in your article, I want to find what you said specifically. You said, Yarvin openly advocates for regime change, which is what you had just said a moment ago, in which a single figure guides society like a CEO. He likens this figure to a monarch, but he does not want to be restricted to the traditional customs and limitations associated with a king. His figure would be endowed with all the powers of a monarch/CEO to get things done, but without the trappings or limitations. So what are he appeals to this idea of monarchy. And when he says monarchy, he really just means rule by the one, I think.
Right.
He
Yeah, I
means
think so.
democracy. And so he doesn't distinguish monarchy versus dictatorship versus any CEO, any of these things. And he fundamentally just means rule by the one. And so in what way does his proposed system kind of differ from what you're talking about, where you're saying he doesn't have the trappings of a traditional ideas of a monarchy?
Right. I mean, because the traditional trappings of a monarch is a monarch is, at least from a Catholic point of view, or from a Catholic perspective, monarchs tend to arise in history, largely because it is a very efficient and very symbolic and very natural way of rule, because it has unity and it can get things done as a result of that unity. But I mean, from the point of view of Catholic monarchy is much more along the line of service. That the king serves the people. He has certain obligations that he has that he knows he cannot. He's not an absolute monarch. He has certain obligations, certain let's say limitations to that power. That's I don't think Yarvin even has any idea of what kind of things they were. The medieval monarchs, for example, they were sort of have an overview, but they were not just these absolute monarchs that got their will. They would go to a city and say and ask someone, do I have the right to enter this city without asking? Do I have the right to this type of taxes? Do I have to do this? What do I have to do? It's very much along the lines of service, and I don't think that he has this idea of service at all. It is all power, and power is a very brutal way of looking at life.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious so when it comes to this critique of power versus the more traditional, because I'm Catholic and you're Catholic, we can just limit it to his idea and maybe the more Catholic idea. So does this power politics idea versus the more traditional Catholic idea, is it particularly that the problem is in the analysis that you're saying? Is it that you're saying that the power, that the power and this kind of Machiavellian game that he's proposing be played? Or is it that you're saying this is functionally not how the system works, or is it that you're saying that this is not how we should want the system to work? I'm kind of curious what the specific critique is.
Right. I mean, I don't think that's the way it does work. I mean, Machiavelli is always seen as someone who is censured, because of his very brutal way of looking at power and dealing with power. That's from the point of view of the Catholic monarchs, especially. Everyone likes to point out to, and they are the archetypes of King Saint Louis IX and King Ferdinand of Spain. These were Catholic monarchs that served that. Uh, well, I mean, the idea is that let's put it this way: Yarvin wants to have a strong man as to be in charge, and what we really need is a strong father,
Hmm.
and that's what a Catholic monarch is: a strong father, and
Hmm.
that's the essential difference. A father it can be very severe, but at the same time, he knows what he has to do as a father.
Hmm. I've also heard an example. Someone had said, there's kind of a difference between a lot of people when they think about someone who, or position of absolute power, for example, like the ability to make an absolute administrative decision, yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
They automatically, especially Americans, tend to automatically think that it's not possible to have that authority without being a tyrant, basically. And I'm curious, that's not necessarily what you're saying, is it?
That excuse me, could you rephrase that? Just
Yeah. Sorry. I think that when it comes to like critiquing an idea of power and a man
Mhm.
having this absolute administrative power, not absolute in every realm, but just the
Right.
ability as the head of state to
Mhm.
make a absolute decision to move the country in one direction. What the critique of that Americans are familiar with is this idea that, well, since power corrupts, you cannot give anyone power like this because it will lead to essentially like a de facto tyranny almost.
Mhm.
So is your critique along those lines, or is it something different than that?
Well, I mean, definitely, absolute power is something that does tend. Well, will lead to dictatorship. Will lead to certain things because we are a human society, and humans don't function like that. As far as getting things done, any CEO will even tell you, I'm not an absolute monarch here because I have to accommodate myself to my team. I have to constantly be doing all types of public relations and getting things, making contacts. I can fire people, but at the same time, sometimes I can't fire people. That's the human reality of things. If you're really going to have a society or a government for that matter, it has to have take into consideration those kind of things.
Hmm.
Communism and other ideological systems that were very brutal. They did tend to do that. They did tend to have that absolute power and abuse that absolute power and lead to a dictatorship. So yeah, I think absolute power is not a good thing in itself. It will it does corrupt. So yeah, the better thing is to have that kind of family like situations, um, those relationships that what I call in the book Return to Order, the representative character, almost I even term it a feudal relationship. That
Hmm.
is a one person who protects another who support who uh, who supports and there is this mutual giving of one to the other that is extremely effective and extremely efficient.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I really liked when reading your book is that I will be honest, it's somewhat annoying the fact that you have the solution you offer is that you essentially say the solution has to be organic. And
Mm.
as someone who wants a quick solution, it's not very satisfying. And
Right, right.
I found myself kind of, punching my leg and saying like, I think you're right, but why do you have to be right? And so,
Now, yeah, organicity has its good points and it does have its bad points. But
mhm,
organicity is so much and according to our nature, and that's the way we live, the way we feel comfortable inside that framework.
mhm,
And the machine framework of the Industrial Revolution, the individualist framework, the that modern society has a lot of very mechanical ways of doing things that are very abrasive and lead to certain problems, mental problems, all sorts of problems that would be resolved if they did have those organic solutions, which they come all of a sudden. It's not as if you have to just wait around for them. We are constantly developing our organic solution to things, and have in our lives, in our families. Family is a very organic situation where you're constantly making adjustments, and it's not a dictatorship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the more I've learned, and I would say I listen a lot to people who kind of are in the more Yarvin realm and who are in the more classical Christian realm, and kind of understanding and thinking about both of them has been something, especially as I've kind of furthered my education, kind of coming to terms with where these different ideas overlap and where they diverge has been somewhat difficult. And one situation I've found that is interesting, I'm curious what your read on it is. If you look at certain systems, especially the founding of them, like all throughout the early medieval world, it seemed to me there was a lot of these wars between these pagan tribes, and oftentimes they were very ruthless and devastating, and but a lot of times what I saw when reading through these histories is that this one king goes, he conquers all of his cousins essentially, and then he decides, okay, I'm going to convert to Catholicism, and then he takes his kind of centralized power and then goes and converts, and then he kind of has this pacified land, I guess, that then becomes the fruitful soil by which the Catholic Church comes in and kind of seeds the ground. Is this dominance that a lot of these pagan rulers used to collect this power, is that not what Curtis Yarvin is advocating for? And this is my genuine curiosity. I'm curious because that's what it seems like to me. Maybe you have a different read of it.
I don't know. I didn't quite get that. He is very vague, at least in the book, Gray Mirrors, about how that is actually exercised. The first book is very much a, as he says, a disturbance. He wants to disturb. He wants to rile up. He wants to create questions. So I didn't see that in it in this particular book. I don't know if he would. Well, I think one of the things that we have to consider in thinking these things out is, again, he's thinking in terms of power play, that you convert the king, everybody converts, and we live happily ever after. Whereas, the church sees it that any conversion, there were some rather rough conversions taking place in the early Middle Ages, but any type of conversion is a fruit of grace, and that grace enters into the soul and would allow those types of situations to exist. That's completely out of. Yarvin's an atheist, so of course he doesn't have any concept of grace, any types, and its implication in history. So the missionaries went there, but God prepared the way for the missionaries, and the people received that interior strength to convert, to live a virtuous life. No one can force a person to live a virtuous life. You can't force people to practice virtue. If you do, you pretty much have just made a prison. Prison people are forced to practice virtue, but it has no merit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually have never heard that analogy used. That's a useful analogy. That does make a lot of sense. I've kind of thought something similar about Julius Caesar and kind of this power. I think that he has the term named after him, this Caesarean figure, right. And Napoleon is a Caesarean figure, and Napoleon has he's a good example of someone who maybe is not traditionally in the traditional Catholic realm thought of as being an ideal, Catholic father in the way you had said. He's thought a lot more of as the strong man. I've I have some friends who are, Napoleonic sympathizers.
Mhm.
Explored the intricacies of that necessarily. But would Caesar and Napoleon kind of be examples of maybe of something that you're not saying? Like those would not be examples of kind of this father figure that you're, advocating.
Right, yeah. Definitely. I mean, the Roman Empire was a very efficient, very well organized organization, but it was also a very brutal, extremely brutal system that was in place. And so and the pagan way of being, it doesn't lend itself well to the charity that's needed, the justice, the everything that's it usually is very brutal wherever you find it. But according to the nature of man, most rulers have something of a father. They will find a way to do it, exhibit it, but it's very difficult. Only with the coming of the Catholic Church were we able to have that type of social harmony that didn't exist before. Napoleon's a whole different case. I think he said he was the French Revolution on horseback, and I think he was. He spread the ideas of the French Revolution all over Europe, and those really did a lot of damage to the church and to society and to the way things were organized. And so yeah, he didn't have any. He didn't really want to be a father. He wanted to just be the conqueror, the one that would spread those horrible ideas that and destroy that framework that was in place everywhere.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm curious. So one thing I know that, traditionally in a Catholic understanding, the idea is that, I personally would feel like I would like to see a lot of change in, the American system and the worldwide system away from, you guys in the TFP use the term, the revolution to kind of diagnose the current problem that we're dealing with. So you could just say, the revolutionary, but, also the liberal system that we exist under, right? And so the difficulty, though, is you see some people, and especially you see from a lot of these, and I don't think these are serious thinkers. I think these are mostly kind of dumb kids and stuff. But you see that gentleman who killed the healthcare CEO. They want this revolutionary, violent change, And then you say, well, you can't go murdering people, and they say, who cares? He worked for the healthcare company. He kills people, whatever it is. He works for the system, and so I think it's maybe easy for a lot of people to reject someone like him, or at least, someone who's not kind of caught up in the fervor of this. But where is the nuance as far as, for example, like I think one of the reasons I really like Caesar as an example is because he was in this ruling class to some extent. He was very successful. He was a member of the government. And what I was initially saying that I meant to get to was, a lot of times in my understanding of Catholic teaching is that a lot of these changes have to be brought about by the correct authority. And so does someone like that kind of count, or does it really need to be the whole system moving? Can one person kind of take over the system, and does that count? I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Well, Caesar obviously counted because even Christ himself said, you would not have the authority. I would be put to death if it was not given to you by God. God does, all authority does come from God, but he does that through leaders, and those leaders can be pagan, they can be Catholic, they can be whatever. There's the different schools of how authority actually takes place, how you can get from a illegitimate authority that all of a sudden becomes legitimized. It's pretty fascinating. I haven't really got into it very much, but at a certain point, that authority that God has can be manifested in these types of people. So Caesar obviously did, but it wasn't the ideal. It wasn't the ideal. But authority has to exist, and as a result, he represented that authority, and he represented the order that is the primary thing. It's the primary. You need order if you're going to have some kind of society. So it worked for that, but Caesar was not. We sort of idealized the Romans and the Greeks and think that they were sort of just like us, but they were just a little bit before, and they had similar lives, but those societies, they did advance. They developed philosophy, they developed law, but they were far from ideal. They had a lot of very strange things. They were, a lot of people were slaves in those societies, and they were, they would have strange ceremonies, strange cults that, and even erotic type cults that were obviously that we would obviously we have to censure. But people generally don't think in those terms when they think of Romans and Greeks. They think of just the law, and he got things done, and the Colosseum, all the things that they did that you see, which represents something, but it's not the whole picture.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that it is very easy, especially with the Romans, like you said, and the Greeks, to get caught up in the specific things you really like and tactics, or the war, the stories of the wars and the conquest, or the with the Greeks, maybe the athletics and the art and all this different stuff. So you do have to consider it holistically to make it.
And the church did baptize some of those things, like Aristotle, and the Roman law system was that we took from that and developed on that.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman legal system was very broad and very vague, but at least it had some kind of principles that were put in place, and then the church improved upon them and gave rise to modern law.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you talk about the fact that a system needs to be organic for it to really, or ideally a system needs to basically grow organically, it can't be forced top down, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hear people say things similar to this, but I don't think they mean what you mean. A lot of the times when I hear people say this, basically what they're saying is exercising political power is wrong. You basically just need to convert everyone. And then once they agree with you, then we can kind of, and once we're de facto in charge because we've converted everyone, then we can do what we want. But to make a decision on behalf of someone who isn't one of us, they might say is, infringing on their religious liberty or something like this is an appeal they might make. I don't think that's what you mean when you say organic necessarily. How would you maybe juxtapose your meaning of it versus this kind of liberalized religious liberty, let's all hold hands and sing together idea that might be common?
Yeah, that is the eternal problem of people of conservative mind, is saying, well, not everybody is a conservative mind, so how do you make everybody of a conservative mind? That is a problem, because you'll just say, well, we either have to force them to do it, or we just form our own little communities where everybody thinks the same. But obviously, I don't think that is a feasible thing, because we have to deal with people. We can't force people to become Catholic. You can't force them to be what they aren't. But there if you look at history, people can change. They can change rather radically over a very short period of time. The example I like to make is the 60s. The 60s, I lived in the 60s. Within 10 years, the whole society changed. And it was, nobody forced them into that kind of situation, but they did change. So if it can change one way, it can also change the other way. I mean, you can reach a situation in society where the gross majority of the population thinks along the lines of a Catholic organic society. Mm-hmm. It's not outrageous to consider that, and you consider things happened like that in the times of the conversions of the peoples when they converted. In a very short period of time, they converted, and of course, again, we get into the problem of grace. Grace evidently helped that along. It didn't help. It was the opposite in the 60s, but if we were to see it to go the other way, organic society would have to somehow work together with God in resolving these problems. God prepares the way. He's always giving us the graces so we do not fall, that we do not sin. We always have sufficient grace. And so in organic society, people tend to work with God and to push things ahead in that sense. And follow the grace, follow where the grace is taking that society.
Hmm.
And many times he does this through elites, through what are called representative characters, how they can change a whole society. A representative character, if you recall in the book Return to Order, it's a sociological term that modern sociologists have used. I didn't make it up. That every society has people who have an ability to represent the aspirations and desires of a people,
Hmm.
and these are key figures. They can change things from one day to the next if they are, depending on their orientation. And I think that is a very key part of any type of return to order would have to be through these representative characters. That they are able to get our view across, and they are extremely convincing. When you come down to it.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The something that I think where you and I agree, and where actually a lot of maybe the more practical power people would also agree, is that fundamentally systemic change has to be brought about by elites. I'm curious if you agree with that. I know some people, like, there's the idea of elite theory, that everything is essentially the battle of elite characters, and sometimes it's one group of elites versus another, but that this kind of great man of history, the elite battle of for how society moves. This is very contradictory to kind of the American mythos of the
Right,
will of the people being the
right,
motivating force behind society.
right.
It's not a elite theory read of the American Revolution is that there's a small group of elites that use the resentment that's has been fomented due to this mismanagement, and they use it to their advantage. But
Mhm.
what you're told in high school and middle school and elementary school is that this is just kind of the pure it's just generated out of the pure distaste that the people have for this monarchy and
Mhm.
this system. And I'm curious, to what extent is there this honor that we owe to this will of the people? Does that matter at all? Is it really just what the elite theorists say? Is it really just one group of elites battling another and using the feelings of the people as kind of a weapon? Or is there kind of a separate allegiance that actually is owed to the people and to their feelings?
Right. I mean, you might say a Catholic elite theory is not to put a juxtaposition between elites and the rest. Um, Elites should be a refinement of what comes from below. That there are certain movements inside the people in which they develop certain abilities, certain arts, whatever. The elite is merely takes those things and refines them so that there's a unity between the elites and the people. And there are all sorts of intermediary elites that go as you go up the scale. It's not just these up here, and then down here you have the people. A feudal society, medieval society, was extremely just layers and layers of elites and distributed sovereignty, throughout all society, so that when you come down to it, the people in all their degrees, they there was this unity, and a person could be an elite to some other people, and then at the same time look to other elites to bring them up. So it was this upward movement that's most important about elites, and it's not a power or political play when you look at it in that sense.
Mhm.
And you see this reflected in a lot of things that were done, that the elites saw they had obligations to uplift society. We're constantly trying to were models and role models for these people, and people they looked up to, and took that seriously. If you're a practicing Catholic, you would take that extremely seriously, and you would you would help with the charity, you would help with the people. And I mean, I don't want to idealize it too much to say, well, that's the way it always was, but there was a lot of that happened, And the church was a very key element in that whole movement.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That is something interesting. And I've even heard, I spoke with a gentleman, and he's not Catholic. I spoke with him on this channel. His name is Arvol, and he's very, very controversial for lots of different reasons. But one of the things I thought was interesting, so he was an ex-Catholic, and he had actually said that he thought, he calls himself like a Platonist. And so he, he can find a lot of kind of common ground with Catholic understanding since, like you said, the church has baptized Aristotle and Plato and a lot of these classic thinkers. But he had said that he thought a great foundation or a great kind of something to base our governmental society on was the structure of the church. And he had said the Catholic Church, and he had said the way that, kind of what you were saying, the way that it elevates the people, the way that everyone looks to the person above them. The priest looks to the bishop, the people look to the priest, and he had, being a ex-Catholic, had some, ideological disagreements, but from a structural perspective, he had kind of given that as an example. Do you think that the church stands as a example of kind of not an organic governmental society, but an organic, faith society in that way?
Well, the church has a lot of organic aspects to it. I mean, there's just the way it developed. I mean, so many things were developed over time. Even liturgy was developed over time. And one of the things I thought was very interesting in doing research was that, for example, modern law was based on canon law. Canon law was the first actual systemization of law. The Romans didn't systematize it. They only made certain principles that were involved very vague and not very precise. Canon law made things precise, and it was carried on into society. And that from there, the Italian universities, had their famous law schools, in which law, as such as we know it today, came from church canon law. So the church provided a lot of models for things for our society, and I think it's and those things develop rather organically over time. It wasn't always that way. It's just as time went on, things developed and improved, constantly trying to improve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another Catholic, another Catholic philosophy, I guess, that, I think is interesting, that maybe, I'm not sure how well this fits in to this power politics idea. I think maybe, I don't see an inherent contradiction, but I think maybe a lot of these power politics, people who fancy themselves Machiavellians, they look at this kind of as a secondary aspect. In Catholicism, I know that there's a lot of this idea of localism, meaning that, we make all of every decision we can on the lowest rung possible. And, the parish makes every decision it can make, and it only has the bishop make a decision that it just simply cannot make. And, the local conference only makes whatever the bishop cannot, and so on and so forth. Is that a system that ought to be kind of used in a legal perspective in building society that way as well?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, subsidiarity is very, very prominent. It's been talked about a lot. But I tend to, everybody tends to say, well, we need to, look at it from one point of view, saying, well, we need to make the decisions at the lowest possible level. But they don't like to admit going to the higher level when they can't make those decisions. And that's where you get into the problem, because if you just keep everything at a local level, you have autarky, which stagnates. Everything's just in that locality, and it never breaks out of that locality and is exposed to stimuluses and things that help society, expose you to better ideals and things like that. So subsidiarity has to work both ways. There has to be mechanisms to take things to a local level, but there also has to be a willingness to also go to a higher level when it's needed, and not just say, well, it's sort of a second, that going to a higher level is just a necessary evil. No, it's not. You need those higher level things, and everyone benefits by that. So you need to have that both ways taking place.
Yes, that makes sense. So how do we go about, I think one of the ways that it feels somewhat frustrating, this idea of subsidiarity, when you hear it, it makes a lot of sense. Same thing with this organic society. When you hear it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And then when you say, how do I operate and actually do this? That's what I was kind of saying. That's when it feels somewhat frustrating.
Yes, yes, no doubt.
And so, especially one of the ways I personally feel like it's frustrating, I feel this way both in the church and in society. It seems like on every rung of government and on every rung of church government, it seems like the people there don't like me. It seems like they're thoroughly revolutionary, both in the way that the TFP uses it and in many other ways. And so I guess when it seems like we, on the organic level, everyone around me seems revolutionary. I mean, to a large extent, obviously I am too, as a product of my culture. And so are all the hierarchies around me. How do we go from a practical perspective about making change in a system like this then?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be objective and see that not everyone, just because that this idea of we have to go after the elites is a very big thing now. All elites are bad, and I think that is a generalization. It's a very dangerous one, because if those elites are bad and you get rid of them, you're going to have other elites that are going to take their places. So it's not really going to resolve the problem. But I mean, I think there are ways in which things can be done and have been done that are surprising. And I would bring as an example the pro-life movement. Pro-life movement had a formidable task of going against the supreme government at every level of the judicial level, and it developed in a very organic way. You had groups all over the place. The pro-abortion movement was frustrated every time it got rid of one, four more would pop up. It has all types of centers and legal things and just all sorts of things, actually at all levels, the state, the county, all, even the social levels. And it put together a very organic movement that I've even seen people like, what's his name, Bowling Alone fellow, Charles Murray. He looked at the pro-life movement and said, this thing really works. It's something, it's amazing how they were able to integrate together. And so you have people, you have all sorts of subsidiarities taking place there, and quarrels and things that, but it overturned Roe v. Wade in the final analysis, 50 years. It had the power that nobody would imagine that it would have been able to do, and without overthrowing governments or doing anything at that level. A parallel thing took place with the traditional Latin Mass. It started out in bank basements and American Legion halls, and then people organized and they worked things out, and you have now it's almost mainstream, to a person to go to a Latin Mass. I mean, I started going to Latin Mass in the 70s, and I remember it was underground church, but now it is almost mainstream. And it was done through a very organic network of people who worked at all levels of the church hierarchy, and worked together with them, pressured them, doing all sorts of things, and they got a lot done. Nobody would have imagined after Vatican II that something like that exists now, and unfortunately it's still being. We still have a long fight ahead of us. Would ever exist, because it was a done deal at that point. So I think there are things like that have proven, and you see in a lot of other areas, especially in the culture war, you find things like that as well. Educational networks, homeschooling networks, solutions that were found outside the system and that worked very efficiently, and forced the revolution to take steps back. It hasn't gone all the way. It hasn't resulted in destroying the revolution, but it has proven a model that really exceeded the expectations of the people who originally began them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that those are good examples as well, because I think that it makes it easy to understand. You can see how the popular support for both the examples you provided has really grown. And there are also these elites at the top.
There are elites in those movements that have got things done. It's amazing. I've been to some conferences, and you just see, well, some of these grassroots conferences, and all of a sudden a person will appear, and he speaks. He speaks well. He knows how to speak. He knows how to get things done. He has that professionalism. And you say, well, this is someone who is an elite, who is inside this movement, is pushing the thing along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's something, these specific examples can kind of provide a good example for people who maybe don't understand, who maybe have this idea that it's all about what the people do and it's the people. And I think it shows a lot how the importance of having someone at the top. And then it also shows the importance of having the popular sentiment as well, because you need someone to take advantage of the popular sentiment. He's very controversial for lots of reasons, but Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is an example of, from the TLM perspective, or a lot of the traditionalist circles, or in Brazil, of the founder of the TFP, Dr. Plinio, is an example of someone who really was able to both of them are people in different ways who were able to really take advantage of this and help, through their excellence, were able to help grow the base, but take advantage of the base that was there. And in both ways, both need each other, Yeah,
I was just thinking when you're mentioning this, that, if there is this grassroots and there is this subsidiary and everything is working along that lines, the elites follow. They may not even agree, but they follow. I went to some of the first pro-life marches, March for Life in Washington in the 70s and 80s, and you'd rarely see a bishop there. Now you can't get enough. They're all they're on the stage, dozens and dozens of them, because they saw this sentiment there and they're following that sentiment. Some of them may not even agree or be as passionate about the issue, but they know that their flocks are going in that direction, and they're forced to actually do what they have to do. So it puts a pressure on them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that's a really good example for a lot of people to help them kind of understand the necessity of what is organic. One critique I've heard is, and I'm curious how you feel about it, we don't want, obviously, you don't want this mob rule, this mindless, crazed mob. And I've heard a lot of people from this kind of elite perspective basically say that without the elites, there's nothing, because you get this chaotic mob. And you see a lot of people, they go to these, kind of mindless political rallies, and you see them get interviewed. What are you here to protest? I'm here to protest this. Why don't you like that? Well, I don't know, and so, they can't really offer these examples. Or, there's the examples of the Occupy Wall Street movement that was popular in the 2000s. And it seems to me that a lot of these movements can very easily be weaponized and turned in certain directions by people with ill intentions. I'm curious, what's your read on something like that?
Definitely, because history is not determined by majorities; it's determined by impassioned minorities that are that carry the day. So any type of movement only succeeds to the point it's articulated, and it needs to be articulated well. And so, naturally speaking, any type of movement will develop leadership structures and more people who are more articulate. And they don't necessarily have to be bank presidents or anything like that. They can be rather ordinary people, can be rather high up in these elite structures that are set up for these particular movements. So everybody seems to think that you have to have a Harvard law degree or something like that, and that's the only way you can be elite. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So to end off a little bit, I think that kind of, I didn't want to spend the whole time just, two guys talking bad about a third guy who wasn't there, So I think I'm glad. I feel like we were able to really kind of lay a foundation using your article talking about Curtis Yarvin. And I think we were able to get to some productive places.
I know, it's very enjoyable. Everything's it's very good. Rarely do you have people talk about these kind of things. It's yes. Very much very, very, very good.
Hmm. And so, one thing that I am curious about, and this is kind of, I think, the last topic I really want to hit, and I'm curious. So we were talking about these, kind of these mob movements and how they can be used in certain directions. These kind of, I guess, populist is maybe one way to say it. These
Mhm.
populist ideas and how they can be co-opted. A good so to anyone listening, a good example of how I personally kind of see that happening is, it seems to me that Donald Trump made a lot of promises that people wanted in his first term, and it's seeming his second term, and once he was in power, didn't seem necessarily like he really was trying to deliver on, and
Mhm.
he kind of co-opted this idea. Similarly, I know in the UK, for example, every single time it's put up to a referendum or a public vote, they always vote in favor of the death penalty and against bringing more immigrants in, and
Mhm.
they never get the death penalty brought back, and they always get more
More
immigrants
immigrants, yes.
brought in.
Yes.
And so an interesting thing is the TFP is an organization, which you're the vice president of the American TFP. You guys are, I think, probably most well known in many cases for the street campaigns you do through the TFP
Student
Student Action.
yes. Mhm.
And what role does that operate? And you guys fight both kind of the cultural war battle against these identity groups that are being weaponized, and you
Mhm.
also especially traditionally fought a lot specifically against communism and a lot of these
Mhm.
other things. So what role does that type of action play in making a change?
Well, I think it's important that people see that there are people out there in the front lines, and they're doing the work that they want to see done. So many people, they like these videos because they say, well, this is what we they like to see action, but not crazy action, illegal action, or this is entirely peaceful and legal. It entirely disconcerts the left. It's calm. It presents a what we call an archetype, a model figure. Saying, well, this is the type of person that we need, and that I think is, and authors have said this. It's more important than sometimes the actual issues themselves. That you are able to present a human type that people can look up to and say, well, this is, I don't know who that person is, but the way that person acts and the way that person presents himself is what we need in our country today. And I think that gives people a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
What's really necessary today a lot is hope, because there is uh, so many discouraging things. And when they see people stand up and do what needs to be done, and we try to do that, it gives them hope, and they say, well, there's something here that has substance, and I want to adhere to that. I think that, and in those particular instances, the left comes out looking very bad as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Does it, to a certain extent, it seems like there is now what you guys do is a little bit different than, for example, like, in the mid 2000s, it was really popular, the videos like Ben Shapiro owns college leftists,
Yes, yeah.
compilation number
Mhm.
one, compilation number two.
Yeah.
You're doing you're going to do the student action does their action regardless of whether or not they're going to go and get gotchas on uneducated students. They
Right,
still
right.
have a way to go and make that change, or not make that change, but go and present their action, take part in their action. And so I kind of see maybe that kind of the Ben Shapiro owns leftist, which can easily be subverted in the opposite direction. And some,
Mhm.
very hyper educated, MSNBC host can go talk to uneducated Republicans, or,
Right, 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 right. Yes.
look bad. Um, in what ways does the TFP action kind of move past the level of this gotcha and this kind of stuff? Because it seems to me that's not a method by which we go and achieve long-term change. But I don't see that when I watch the street campaigns and when I speak to the members of the TFP.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't plan that. In fact, but some of these leftists are really they're just so stupid, let's say, that you can't script it. They come up with these things, and it does present that contrast. One of the things I think is very important is that contrast, the contrast between good and evil, right and wrong, these kind of things that are very important. And one of the things of student action that I think is very impressive is that it is something that's very consistent over, let's say, 15 years. Those videos have been out, and people have grown up with these videos, and we get a lot of people who convert as a result of those things. Who say, I've converted. We had a Satanist who recently said she converted because of these videos. Mm-hmm. They see something much more profound than just some arguments, and they see a consistency between the arguments and the behavior as well. You have these arguments, you behave like this. You're not vulgar. You don't use profanity. They put it all together. They may not have it explicit in their minds what it is, but they put it all together and they say, well, if they're like this, then the Catholic Church must be something that we can look at. And it's amazing the stories, the comments, and the letters, and emails that we're getting that that really prove this out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's about what I really wanted to hit on and land on. What are the best ways that someone who watched this video and liked it can support you, can support the things that you want to promote, if you can use this moment and promote some of the things you think are worth promoting?
Well, I will begin with my book, with this Return to Order. ReturnToOrder.org is the website. You can go there and get what we call a workbook copy of the book, which is for free. But if you can give a donation if you want. But you can get that book, and that's a good place to start if you want. If you like the ideas that you've seen here and we've been talking about, ReturnToOrder.org is the campaign that I do a lot with, because I'm the author of the book. But if you want to go broader than that, you can go to TFP.org, which is the organization, or the mother organization that encompasses all these tradition, family, property, these ideas, or TFP Student Action as well. Which, if you want to see the videos, TFP Student Action is the place to see the videos. From there, you can get a broad vision of where we're at, and it'll suggest ways in which you can help.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend? I often recommend Revolution and Counter-Revolution to people. Mm-hmm. Is that a book that you would say, assuming someone has kind of a baseline knowledge, they've read a little bit but not very much, and they're starting to get into this realm, would you recommend Revolution, Counter-Revolution before or after Return to Order?
No, definitely before. Return to Order was written as a sort of a extension of Revolution and Counter-Revolution. So yeah, Revolution and Counter-Revolution is a great book. It's on TFP.org. It's on our bookstore. You just go there and you can get a copy. It's a great book. It'll give you that framework from which you can see, well, what are the sides, how we can fight, what's at issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'll do a quick little sign out, let everyone know what's going on the YouTube for the rest of the time, and then we'll sign out, and I'll tell everyone here on the stream good night. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed me talking with Mr. John Horvat here. It was really nice. It took us a little bit of back and forth to get it scheduled, but I'm really glad that we were able to get this talk going. I think this is a great supplement and an addition to the talks I did with my other friend, Mr. Michael Whitcraft. Both of those videos on my channel are called the death and the rebirth, or something like that, of Christian society. And they talk about the fundamental idea of the revolution concept we were talking about, and how we kind of move back to this idea of Christian society as well. And talking about the ideas of the book from the book Revolution, Counter-Revolution, kind of breaking that down a little bit more. I have a video that will be coming out later this week from my talk with Mike Pantile, which was available for members only this morning. And so anyone who's a channel member, you can become a channel member and access that right now, or you can wait and get the edited version later this week or maybe next week, depending on how much turkey I eat on Thanksgiving. Besides that, thank you guys for watching so much. And that is the end of everything for tonight. Good night. All right.